I booked a cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. Just a simple place, nothing fancy, far enough from the city to get some peace. I had been working non-stop, and a break felt long overdue. The cabin was listed as secluded, just off the beaten path, near a small lake. The reviews were good. People had called it rustic and charming, the perfect kind of escape. The drive there wasn't too bad. I followed the GPS, which led me down winding roads, past dense forests and rolling hills. As the miles stretched on, the signal faded, and I found myself driving along a narrow dirt road. The trees closed in tighter on both sides, and the road became less and less clear. I couldn't help but wonder if I had missed a turn. But then I saw it. An old wooden sign with faded letters pointing to a cabin. A single lane veered off the road and headed into the woods. It was the right place. I parked near the cabin, noting how isolated it was. The trees around it were thick, blocking much of the sunlight. The cabin itself was small, made of weathered wood, and had a crooked roof. The windows were old, the glass dimmed with time. A small porch sat in front, with 2 chairs and a table covered in moss. Everything about it seemed perfectly quiet, almost still. I grabbed my bag, stepped out of the car, and felt the silence settle in around me. It was peaceful, but the kind of silence that felt a bit too heavy. The air was thick, almost humid, though it wasn't overly hot. I walked up to the porch and noticed the door was already slightly open, just enough for a breeze to move through. I pushed it the rest of the way. Inside was just as simple as the photos had shown. A small living room with a stone fireplace, an old couch, a couple of armchairs. The kitchen was in the back, with an old stove and a wooden table. The place smelled faintly of dust and wood, a little musty, but nothing unpleasant. There was a narrow staircase leading up to a loft with a bed. I didn't mind it. I preferred the small, cozy feel of it all. I was here to relax, after all. I put my things down and took a few minutes to look around. There were a couple of books on the shelf, an old kettle on the counter, some dried flowers in a vase near the window. The cabin had character, like it had been lived in for years. I liked that, felt real. As the sun set, I decided to light the fireplace. The flames crackled, throwing flickering shadows across the room. I was content. The quiet outside was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. I had no plans for the evening, no need to rush. The cabin was mine for the weekend. It was getting darker faster than I expected. The lack of streetlights, the thick canopy of trees, everything outside seemed to turn black all at once. I got up to close the window, but before I could, I noticed something, a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a branch hitting the side of the cabin. But then it came again, soft, almost rhythmic. I paused, listening. The tapping stopped. My pulse quickened. I couldn't figure out what it was. The place was completely isolated. I hadn't seen anyone on my drive up. The nearest house was miles away. I checked the door, making sure it was locked. Then, I moved towards the window and peeked out. The porch was empty. Nothing moved in the yard. I breathed a little easier, but still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I turned off the light and climbed into bed, still unsettled. The cabin creaked, the fire crackled, and the wind outside picked up. The noises of the night were familiar, leaves rustling, branches swaying. Yet, the silence was too loud at times, as if the woods were holding their breath. I drifted off to sleep, but not for long. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound again. The tapping. It was louder this time, as if something was on the porch. I lay still, listening, my heart pounding. The sound wasn't constant, but it was deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I slid out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and carefully moved to the window. The night was pitch black, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I couldn't see anything on the porch. But then I saw it. Something small, moving in the shadows, just at the edge of the porch, where the light from the window couldn't reach. I froze, not sure what I was seeing. It was too dark to make out clearly, but it looked like a figure hunched over, crouching low. My chest tightened. The air around me felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The figure shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach drop. Something shiny, a metal glint. I didn't wait to see more. I backed away from the window, my breath quick and shallow. I grabbed my phone, dialed the number for the rental company, but there was no signal. I was completely alone. I moved to the front door, locked it, and checked the windows again. Everything seemed secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. The tapping resumed, this time louder, coming from right outside the door. The porch creaked under weight, like someone was walking around it. I stood there, paralyzed. Should I leave? Should I go outside? I had no idea what to do. I couldn't stay in the cabin another minute. My mind raced, but before I could act, the sound stopped. I waited, listening. Silence. For a long while, I didn't hear anything. I thought maybe it was over, but then, just as I turned to head back to the bedroom, I heard the door handle jiggle. Slowly at first, then more insistently. My heart hammered in my chest. I grabbed the flashlight and moved to the back door, the only other exit. I opened it carefully, just a crack. Outside, the wind was howling through the trees, but the yard was empty. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, scanning the area. The beam cut through the dark, revealing nothing but trees. But then, my flashlight caught something near the corner of the cabin. Something partially hidden behind a bush. It was a large duffel bag. My stomach churned. It hadn't been there before. I approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I moved the bag aside, and there, underneath it, was a small wooden box. It was weathered, old, and partially buried under leaves. I knelt down, feeling the cold earth beneath me as I lifted the box out. When I opened it, I saw nothing inside but scraps of paper and a few old photographs. The papers were too faded to read clearly, but the photos were of the cabin. Different angles showing the porch, the yard, but they were older, much older. The last photo in the box showed the cabin with a figure standing near the front door. The figure was barely visible in the photo, but the shape was unmistakable. It was hunched over, wearing a dark coat, and its face was hidden in shadow. I dropped the box, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to make of it, but I didn't care to find out. I grabbed my things, ran to the car, and drove down the dirt road as fast as I could. The road seemed longer than it had on the way up. The trees closed in around me, the air heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. I didn't go back, not even to pick up my things. I haven't looked at the photo since, but I keep thinking about the figure in that last picture, standing at the door. I don't know who or what it was, but I'll never forget the feeling that whatever was in those woods, it wasn't just the trees. I'd been planning the weekend getaway for months, just a quick escape from the grind, a way to unwind after weeks of chaotic office life. A cabin in the woods seemed like the perfect choice. It wasn't remote. There was a small town not too far away, but it was secluded enough to make it feel like a real break from everything. The photos showed an old, rustic cabin, surrounded by towering pines, its wood paneling weathered but sturdy. It had a charm like something out of an old novel. The host had said the place was peaceful, that the nearest neighbors were miles away, and I had no reason to doubt them. Everything looked perfect. I arrived around mid-afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. The drive had been long, but the roads were clear, and the air smelled fresh, pine-scented. When I pulled up, the cabin stood in front of me, looking exactly as it had in the pictures. No surprises, nothing out of place. I was alone, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The door creaked when I opened it, a sound that felt welcoming somehow, and I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Wood, dust, a hint of mildew, like the place hadn't been aired out in a while. It wasn't unpleasant, just a reminder that the cabin had been sitting empty for some time. I set my bag down by the door and wandered through the small, dimly lit interior. The living room had a large stone fireplace, its mantel cluttered with old books and a few strange knickknacks. The furniture was worn but comfortable. A heavy wooden table sat in the corner with a few chairs around it, and beyond that, a door led into the kitchen. There was a staircase, narrow and steep, that led to the second floor, but I didn't feel the need to go up right away. I spent the next few hours getting settled, unpacking my things and making myself at home. The cabin felt lived in, even though no one had been there in weeks, maybe months. I started a fire in the hearth, letting the warmth spread through the room. I opened the windows, letting in the cool evening air, and settled down with a book. The silence outside was complete, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. Night came quickly. I hadn't planned on doing much that evening. I made myself a simple dinner, something quick, and after eating, I sat in front of the fire with my drink, watching the flames flicker. The cabin creaked in the stillness, the sound of the wood settling. It wasn't unusual, not at all. It was an old building. But as I sat there, I began to notice something. The sound wasn't always just the building settling. It was different. A thud, then a soft scrape, as if something heavy was being dragged across the floor. I froze, listening. The sounds were faint but unmistakable. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe something outside, but it wasn't that. There was no breeze coming through the windows, no branches scraping against the cabin. It came again, a scraping, followed by a low thud. My heart began to race. I didn't know why I was alone. There was no one else here, but the sound was enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I stood up, slowly, and moved towards the stairs. The sounds had stopped, but my ears were straining to catch any sign of movement. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I ascended to the second floor. The hallway upstairs was narrow, the wood floors dark with age. The rooms were small, sparsely furnished. I checked them all, each room was empty. The master bedroom had a large, four-poster bed covered in heavy blankets, the curtains drawn tight. Nothing out of place. I walked back to the landing, feeling a strange unease creeping up my spine. The sounds downstairs had stopped, but the air felt heavier now, as if something was pressing down on me. I looked down the hallway, my eyes darting from one corner to the other. Then I heard it again, a soft dragging sound, coming from the kitchen below. This time I was sure it wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag, made my way back downstairs, and moved slowly towards the kitchen. The door was open, just a crack. I pushed it all the way open, the hinges groaning in protest. The kitchen was dark, but I could see the outline of the counters and the old wood stove. There was a strange smell in the air, not quite food, but something earthy, almost rotting. I scanned the room, checking behind the stove and the sink. The drawers were closed, the cabinets locked. But then, my eyes fell on the floor. There, just beyond the counter, was a smear of something dark. Mud, maybe, or something worse. It wasn't there earlier. I knelt down, my heart pounding in my chest. The smear led towards the back door, the one that opened to the small deck outside. It was slightly ajar, a gap of maybe an inch. I moved towards it, and as I reached out to pull it shut, I heard a soft scraping noise from behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I spun around, flashlight beam darting through the shadows. Nothing. The room was empty. The scraping had stopped, but the air felt thick, like it was pressing in from all sides. My mind was racing. There was no reason for anyone to be here. The host had said the cabin was empty, and there were no neighbors nearby. Yet, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I closed the door tightly, locked it, and sat down at the kitchen table, trying to steady my breath. I needed to calm down. It was just my imagination, or so I told myself. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak, every gust of wind outside, every shifting shadow in the corners of my vision had me on edge. I eventually managed to drift off, but the sense of unease never left. I dreamed of the smear on the floor, the dragging sound, the door being opened, and then something or someone coming up the stairs. When morning came, the sun was bright and clear, but the feeling of dread still hung in the air. I tried to tell myself it was just my nerves, that I'd imagined everything. The cabin was old, creaky, and settled over time. But as I stood in the kitchen, preparing coffee, I couldn't ignore the fact that the back door was slightly open again. Not much, just an inch. It was locked when I'd gone to bed, and yet here it was, as though someone had been outside, watching. I didn't stay another night. The sense of being followed, of something just beyond my sight, had become overwhelming. I packed up my things quickly, left the cabin, and drove away, never looking back. As I pulled away down the dirt road, I couldn't help but wonder what had really happened that night. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. Someone had been there. And the smear on the kitchen floor? I still don't know what it was, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. The mountain cabin had always been the perfect getaway in my mind. Remote, isolated, far from everything. I needed silence, space to think. The kind of solitude that comes with being alone in the woods, tucked up against the face of a mountain, far enough from town that no one could find me unless they knew exactly where to look. The air was thin, crisp, and clean. That's why I was there. It was supposed to be my retreat, a place to clear my head after a rough patch. The cabin was small, old, but sturdy. Its wood was weathered, its paint chipped, but I knew that it had withstood more than a few storms. It had a kind of charm to it, the kind that didn't try too hard, just stood there, as though waiting for someone to rediscover it. The kind of place where time felt like it could slip away unnoticed. I had arrived late, the sun already dipping behind the mountain peaks. I unloaded my things quickly, the air biting at my skin as I carried my bag to the door. The cabin sat alone in a clearing, surrounded by trees that were thick with their autumn colors. There was a small porch with a single rocking chair. A few steps led up to the door. I stepped inside, feeling the coolness of the interior, a kind of stillness that had settled in the space. The living room was simple. A stone fireplace sat in the center of the wall, with a pile of dry logs beside it. A few mismatched chairs scattered about the room. A heavy wooden table in the center. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the books a mix of old novels and manuals on outdoor survival. There was a kitchen area off to one side, and upstairs, a single bedroom with a bed covered in a faded quilt. I had no intention of doing anything tonight but settling in. I lit a fire, sat down in the chair, and stretched out, letting the warmth seep into my muscles. Outside, the wind howled a little, brushing against the trees. The sound was comforting. It reminded me that the world was far away. I unpacked, made a simple dinner, and ate while staring into the fire. I kept hearing small noises from outside. The wind, the trees, maybe an animal. Couldn't tell. It wasn't unsettling, not at first. But by the time I finished my meal, the darkness had settled in thick, and something had changed in the air. It wasn't the wind anymore. It was something else, something just on the edge of my awareness. I finished my meal, cleaned up, and decided to turn in early. The bed was comfortable, the quilt heavy and warm. The wind continued to blow outside, but it wasn't harsh. It was steady, like a constant companion to the stillness of the night. I closed my eyes, trying to let go of the thoughts that had been swirling in my head. I woke up suddenly, my body stiff, my breath shallow. It was still dark, but something felt different. The air felt heavier. The wind outside had stopped, and with it, the familiar hum of nature that had surrounded me all evening. It was as if the world had gone silent. I lay there for a moment, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything outside, not even the occasional rustle of the trees. I swung my legs out of bed, the cool floorboards creaking beneath me as I stood. My first thought was that maybe it was just the altitude or the isolation playing tricks on me. But then I heard it. A noise, soft, deliberate, tap on the window. I froze. I didn't move for what felt like a long time, but in reality it was probably only a few seconds. The silence outside stretched on. I couldn't tell where the sound had come from, whether it was on the window, the porch, or somewhere deeper in the woods. But it was there, unmistakable, like a faint knock that had interrupted the stillness. I didn't want to move. My breath quickened, and I felt the sweat start to bead on the back of my neck. I wasn't sure what to do. The cabin was alone. No neighbors within miles. No one should have been out here, certainly not at this time of night. I considered calling the ranger station, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. There was no one else out here, no one who could help. Another tap, this time louder. My heart started to pound, the sound in my ears louder than my own pulse. I wanted to go to the window to look outside, to see what it was. But the fear of what I might find kept me rooted in place. I knew that whatever was out there, it wasn't supposed to be. No one should have been within range of this cabin. I tried to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of it. The wind had stopped completely, and now the world outside felt too still. It didn't feel right. The air seemed thicker somehow, heavier, pressing in. I wanted to close my eyes, to pretend it was just my mind playing tricks. But the silence was unnerving. The air oppressive. I slowly approached the window, moving cautiously, each step slower than the last, like I was moving through molasses. I reached the window and looked outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The porch was empty. There was nothing there. But then I noticed something. A faint trail in the dirt, just beyond the steps. It wasn't much, just a few disturbed patches of soil, as if something had moved across the ground. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. I quickly backed away from the window, my body tense with the rising sense of danger. The wind began again, soft at first, then gradually picking up speed. The trees began to sway once more, their branches scraping against the cabin's roof. I felt a strange need to leave, to get out of the cabin, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My feet wouldn't move. I stood there, frozen, waiting for something that I couldn't explain. The noise came again, this time from the back of the cabin, like the slow, deliberate scraping of something along the wood. I stood motionless, trying to ignore the panic welling up inside me. My eyes scanned the dark corners of the room, but there was nothing there, only the creeping sound of whatever was outside, moving closer. I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my bag, hurriedly packed a few essentials, and decided to leave. I didn't care if it was the middle of the night. I needed to get out. The door creaked loudly as I opened it, stepping out into the chill of the night. The trail in the dirt outside the porch had become clearer now, a series of deep impressions leading into the trees. It looked like someone had walked up to the cabin, slow, deliberate steps, before they turned and went back into the forest. I followed the trail for a while, the ground soft beneath my boots. The mountain air was sharp, the dark sky above dotted with stars. But all around me, the trees were quiet, too quiet. My mind raced with possibilities. I hadn't seen a soul when I arrived. No one had passed by in days. The trail led me deeper into the woods, and as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept moving, my mind clouded with fear, until I reached the edge of the clearing where the trees started to thin. That's when I saw it. A small campfire, long extinguished, the remnants of a charred log still visible. The site was abandoned, but fresh footprints circled the fire. Someone had been here recently, and they weren't alone. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever had been outside my cabin had been watching me, waiting for something. I turned back, walking faster now, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with every step. By the time I got back to the cabin, I didn't waste any time. I packed up my things, grabbed my keys, and drove back down the mountain, not looking back. What had happened out there, what had been waiting for me, I never found out. But I left that mountain behind, and I never went back to that cabin. Some places are better left untouched. I had always liked the idea of being alone in the woods. The thought of no distractions, just the hum of nature surrounding me, felt like the perfect way to escape the chaos of everyday life. So when I found the cabin online, hidden deep in the woods, off the beaten path, it seemed like the perfect place to unwind. I booked it immediately, eager to disconnect. The drive was long. The road narrowed the further I went, the trees closing in around me. The cabin was supposed to be about 2 hours from the nearest town, and by the time I reached the final stretch, I was driving down an unpaved road, the tires kicking up dust. The sun was already low, casting long shadows across the dirt. When I saw the cabin, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. It was small, built from dark wood that had faded with age, the kind of place you see in old photos of cabins in the mountains. It sat alone in the clearing, surrounded by trees so thick that the sunlight barely reached the ground. There was a single stone chimney, a small porch with a few rocking chairs, and a single window on the second floor. Nothing around it but woods and more woods. I parked near the porch, grabbed my bag, and stepped out of the car. The silence hit me first. No cars, no distant hum of people, just the rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere off in the distance. I felt a pang of nervousness but shrugged it off. This was why I was here, right? Inside, the cabin was simple. There was a small kitchen to the right, a living area with a fireplace in the center, and a staircase leading to the second floor. The furniture was old but sturdy, and there were bookshelves lined with a variety of books, some old, some new. The kind of place that hadn't been touched by anyone for a while. The air smelled of wood and something faintly musty, but it wasn't unpleasant. The sort of scent that told you this place had a history. I set my things down and began to explore. I opened the back door to check out the view, but the deck overlooked nothing but more trees. No lake, no open field, just an endless sea of green. I sat in one of the rocking chairs, my feet propped up on the railing. I closed my eyes and listened. The wind rustled through the branches, the occasional bird call in the distance, but there was something else. A low, faint sound, almost like a whisper carried on the breeze, but I couldn't make it out. I told myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't completely alone. As night began to fall, the quiet deepened. I lit a fire in the hearth and made myself dinner, eating in silence. I tried to relax, reading one of the books from the shelf, but the same unease I had felt earlier gnawed at me. It wasn't fear. It was more like a prickling on the back of my neck, a sense that something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I decided to turn in early. The bedroom was simple, the bed large and comfortable, but the feeling lingered. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting faint shadows across the floor. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the woods outside, the wind against the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl, but beneath it all, there was something else. A faint scraping sound, like something dragging against the ground. I chalked it up to my imagination, the isolation, the unfamiliar sounds of the woods. But still, the scraping came again. Soft, slow, like a branch dragging across the ground. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or something else wandering nearby, but I couldn't ignore the nagging thought that whatever it was close, too close. I tried to sleep, pulling the covers up around my shoulders, but sleep didn't come easily. The noise continued, a dragging sound, then silence, then more dragging, like someone or something was walking around the cabin. I could hear the steps, the creak of the wood, the crunch of leaves beneath heavy feet. I couldn't stay still anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly got out of bed. I stood in the middle of the room, listening. The sound had stopped, but I could still feel the weight of it, as if whatever had been there was still waiting. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The porch was empty, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the clearing. I could see nothing, but something about the way the trees moved, the way the branches twisted in the moonlight, felt wrong. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But the more I listened, the more I realized something wasn't right. The scraping sound had stopped, but the night had grown unnaturally quiet. I couldn't even hear the wind anymore. The woods were holding their breath, waiting. I decided to check the doors and windows, make sure everything was locked. The back door was secured, but when I went to check the front door, I noticed something strange. The lock was intact, but the door itself had a faint smear of dirt on it, like something had brushed against it. I ran my finger along the mark. It was fresh. My heart skipped a beat. I locked the door again and moved to the window, my breath shallow. I had to know. I had to see. I lifted the curtain and looked out into the dark. Nothing. The porch, the clearing, all empty. But then a shadow moved. It was quick, too quick for me to make out clearly, but I saw it. Something low to the ground, moving between the trees, something large. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't a person. It was too fast, too quiet, and it was heading toward the cabin. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced. What could it be? An animal? But the shape didn't move like any animal I knew. It was too deliberate, too careful. I didn't want to stick around to find out what it was. I grabbed my things, shoved them into my bag, and headed for the door. But as I opened it, a chill swept through the cabin, the kind that made my skin crawl. The porch was empty again, but something was different. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest. I stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but there was no sign of anything, just the trees and the thick silence. I didn't want to go any further. I knew something was out there. I could feel it. The dragging sound came again, closer this time. I turned, heart in my throat, and saw the shadow moving between the trees once more. This time it was unmistakable. The figure was tall, hunched, its shape distorted by the darkness, like it was made of the shadows themselves. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I ran, not looking back until I reached my car. I didn't care how I looked or how foolish I felt. I was out of there. I didn't stop until I was miles away, my heart still pounding in my chest. The woods were behind me, and I had no intention of ever going back. I don't know what it was I saw that night. Maybe it was an animal, maybe something else. But whatever it wasn't something I was willing to stay around to figure out. The woods, the cabin, they were better left behind. There are some things in the dark you're better off not understanding. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A small cabin tucked away in the woods, miles from anyone or anything. It seemed like the perfect place to get away, clear my head, and escape the stress of work. The cabin was off the beaten path, about 2 hours from the nearest town, and I had been assured that it was completely isolated, which was exactly what I wanted. The drive was long, winding through dense forests, the road narrowing as I went deeper into the woods. The trees were thick, the branches hanging low, and the sky above barely visible through the canopy. Felt like the world was closing in, but I didn't mind. I was used to being alone, and the solitude was exactly what I needed. When I finally reached the cabin, it was exactly as I had imagined it. Small, old, with dark wooden beams and a rustic charm. It sat at the edge of a clearing, surrounded by tall pines. The air smelled fresh, like pine and earth. There was a slight breeze, but other than that, it was silent. No animals, no people, just the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. I grabbed my bag from the car and headed inside. The cabin was simple but cozy. A small living room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a few shelves of books. The kitchen was basic but had everything I needed. There was a staircase leading to a loft where the bedroom was. I could already tell that it would be quiet here, perfect for a few days of peace. I unpacked my things, settled in, and started a fire in the fireplace. Crackled and popped, filling the room with warmth. I made myself a quick dinner, something easy, and then sat down on the couch, eating while I watched the fire. It was dark outside now, and the wind had picked up a little. I felt completely at ease, just enjoying the solitude. The kind of quiet you only get when you're truly alone, deep in the woods. But as the night wore on, something started to feel off. At first, I couldn't place it. It was just a subtle unease, like a pressure building in the air. The cabin creaked a little, the way old houses do, and the fire flickered. It was normal, nothing strange about it. But the silence outside felt too complete, too perfect. There was no sound of animals, no insects buzzing, no distant calls of birds or rustling leaves. Just quiet. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. It had been a long drive and I was tired. I decided to head to bed early. The stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed up to the loft, and I went straight to bed, pulling the thick blankets around me. The air was cool but comfortable. The cabin was so peaceful, so still. I closed my eyes and fell asleep quickly. But I didn't stay asleep for long. I woke up in the middle of the night. It wasn't the noise that woke me. It was the feeling. Something wasn't right. I couldn't say exactly what it was, but I felt it, like a heaviness in the air. I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding, listening to the silence. The wind had stopped completely. It was eerily still. Then I heard it, a soft tapping coming from somewhere outside the cabin. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it was there. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't regular. It was erratic, like something or someone was moving around outside, testing the walls, trying to make as little noise as possible. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears to catch any more sounds. The tapping continued, soft and steady, but it was definitely moving. It wasn't wind, it wasn't rain. It sounded like footsteps, but too soft, too deliberate. I sat up in bed, my chest tight. There was no one around for miles. I had made sure of that before I came. But then, why was there someone out there? I had no idea what to do. Should I go check? Should I stay put? The thoughts raced through my mind, each one more ridiculous than the last. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere. The tapping continued, closer now. I could hear it moving along the side of the cabin, getting nearer to the window. My breath caught in my throat as I sat there, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The cabin felt too small, too exposed. My mind raced. Could someone have followed me here? No, that didn't make sense. I hadn't seen a single car on the road since I turned off the main highway. Then, I heard something worse. A low, scraping noise came from the window, like someone dragging something heavy across the wood. I didn't move. I just listened. My heart was pounding now, my ears ringing. I wanted to get up, to look out the window, but I was frozen in place. The scraping continued for a moment, then stopped. I couldn't take it anymore. I swung my legs out of bed and grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand. I moved silently down the stairs, the creaking of the floorboards under my feet making my pulse spike. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. I crept toward the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. Outside, the porch was dark, but I could make out a figure standing there, motionless. Person? No, it was too still, too unnatural. My hand shook as I held the flashlight. The beam of light hit the figure, and for a moment, I thought I saw something glint in the darkness. Something sharp, maybe metal. My stomach turned. I backed away from the window, trying to make as little noise as possible. I was paralyzed, torn between the urge to run and the need to understand what was happening. But I couldn't stay in the cabin with that thing outside. I moved to the back door, heart hammering in my chest. I had to get out of here. I opened the door slowly, making sure it didn't creak. The night air hit me, cold and biting. I stepped outside, keeping low, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The porch was empty now. The figure was gone. I scanned the yard, the trees, every shadow. Nothing. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or more terrified. The wind had picked up again, the trees swaying, but I didn't feel any safer. I knew someone had been out there. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it in my bones. I didn't stay to find out what would happen next. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and ran to my car. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I pulled out of the driveway as fast as I could, not looking back. I don't know who or what it was out there that night. I've never been able to shake the feeling that something was watching me. But when I made it back to town, I stopped at a gas station and asked about the cabin. The attendant looked at me like I was crazy when I described what had happened. But then he told me something I'll never forget. That cabin's been vacant for a long time. The last person who stayed there, well, they didn't leave on their own. I haven't gone back, and I don't think I ever will. Something about that place that night is better left in the past.